Have you considered renting your property to a tenant that may require help from a voucher from HUD every month in order to be able to afford to live in your house? You may have some landlord friends that rent to Section 8 tenants who talk about the joys of having that automatic bank deposit hit their account each month on the 1st. Now, you might also hear some horror stories from other people or read online about the damages some Section 8 family caused to their property. The other thing you may think about as you're contemplating is Section 8 a good thing for me is the added bureaucracy and inspections that come with the territory of allowing your property to be quote unquote available to a tenant that requires this kind of voucher. Now, will you have less control over your property or your process to renting it out? Yes. Is it worth it? Maybe, especially considering the location of your property. In today's video, we're going to talk about the pros and the cons of marketing your rentals as open to Section 8 tenants, especially if you want to maximize the rent that you can collect from your rental business over time. Now, Section 8, I use the term HUD voucher kind of interchangeably. Section 8, that term really comes from the section of the Housing and Urban Development Code that relates to this type of program. Today, you'll hear people more commonly just referring to it as a HUD voucher. Now, before I get started, I just want to introduce myself. If you're new to this channel, I'm Veronica Woods. Welcome to the Real Estate Wisdom channel, where we produce tips each month about how to keep a more profitable rental property portfolio, as well as give market updates about what's going on in the world of real estate here in my local market in the Philadelphia area, especially Delaware County and Philadelphia County. If you want to get in contact with me and talk to me personally instead of just through the screen, you can reach out to any of the contact information below this video. I also have some really good downloads, whether you're a buyer, seller, or investor. So let's jump into the pros of making your rental available to Section 8 tenants. The first pro is that the HUD rent schedule will make it easy for you to get market rents, especially in lower income neighborhoods. And by lower income neighborhoods that just have a higher percent or a lower average median income with the population. So HUD actually sets these rates with this rate table for each metropolitan area each year. So it's actually in October each year, they're revisiting the rates, and they actually increase the rates each year. So for 2024, across the board, there was about a 12% increase in rental rates. Now with Philadelphia metropolitan area, including Camden and Wilmington, they take a more granular approach. So they don't just set a Philadelphia rental rate, they actually set the rates by zip code and by type of home, from studio to 4+ bedrooms in a table. And so this is a reference point as a landlord just to figure out, well, how much could I get if I make my apartment available to a Section 8 tenant? And just to throw out some numbers, for example, I pulled out some numbers for 3 bedrooms using the 2024 table. And so in Chester, a 3 bedroom, you could get up to $1,600 a month. Take what in West Philadelphia, the 19143 zip code for a 3 bedroom, you can get $1,700 a month. And then let's take another suburban neighborhood, Lansdowne, that it has a lot of investors or rental properties. You can get $1,840 a month, or up to $1,840 a month for 3 bedroom rentals. So you can see that for areas that do have a lower average median income of the population, it may be harder to find the same or a large pool of people that can afford $1,700 a month in rent. But when you make yourself open to accepting a voucher, you just really expand your likelihood of being able to get that top market rent. The second pro is that direct deposit of the voucher, which is the housing authority's portion of the rent, you can get by direct deposit. So once your rent is approved, you'll fill out a form with the local housing authority about where you want the rent to be sent. And like clockwork, by the 1st or the 2nd, depending on if it's a holiday or not, that money is deposited into your account. The third pro is that you can leverage the HUD's housing counselor to help reinforce that the tenant is abiding by the lease terms. Now they're not necessarily your boss, it's still your property, and they'll definitely defer a lot that the landlord has to make that decision, or we stay out of that. That's a landlord problem. But there are times for something as simple as the tenant is overdue or past due with rent that the local housing authority may have a template that they could send to kind of remind the tenant that they're still responsible for their portion of the rent. So there is the family contribution and there's a HUD voucher. So most tenants are paying something. And so if you're able to develop a relationship with the housing counselor, that you can kind of tag team if there's a problem to either, again, have extra reminders to the tenant or kind of help support you in getting the tenant's lease terminated. If it comes to that situation, you have someone that, again, is a partner in you being able to, make good decisions about your rental property. Fourth pro that I mentioned is that the voucher itself is considered an asset to the tenant that they want to keep. And they know if they do something that violates the terms of the voucher, they lose it. And by losing the voucher, they're also maybe losing the opportunity to live in a better neighborhood. So as I mentioned a little earlier, a lot of times that these vouchers are allowing people to live in neighborhoods that they couldn't do so on their own. And so there's something to be said about, doing the right thing and following the terms so that they can keep not only, be able to stay in your property that's safe and clean, but they also keep their voucher. So that's something, that's somewhat theoretical. Now, there are definitely some people who don't care. They're going to do what they want to do. But there's something to be said that, good families value the opportunity that the voucher can give to them. Now I want to review some of the cons. So the first con is that you still need to have a rental collection and management process for that family portion of the rent. So for most vouchers, the family has some monthly payment that they're responsible for, and they could get late with that. So you may have to assess late fees. So you just need to be prepared that although the HUD portion is on autopilot, direct deposit, the family portion is not. The second con is that the tenant can trigger a complaint inspection without even notifying you first. So this is nothing to do with you passing the initial HUD inspection before they moved in. At any time during their tenancy, they can file a complaint against you, and the only notice you get is the phone call from in our area, it's a third-party inspection company that says they're coming out to do the inspection. So if you don't have a good communication with the tenant, you could be surprised. Or if it's an antagonistic situation with the tenant, you kind of have to be on guard. And when the inspectors come out, they don't just check for one thing. They do a complete inspection of the house, and they could find things that weren't even a problem to the tenant. They weren't complaining about. They may have been complaining about A, but they see B and C, and then all of a sudden you have to fix all these things in 2 weeks, or else your voucher payment is in jeopardy. So that is something just to consider when you are, making your property available. The third con is that you really can't set the rent on your own for a Section 8 tenant. So although you do have the higher likelihood to collect closer to market rent, you still kind of are bound by what the HUD counselor says that your property should rent at. So there's two big factors that go into figuring out how close to the maximum rent you can get for your property. One, the HUD counselor first just looks at your particular property and compares it to other homes available for rent in the area. And they kind of compare amenities. So, if you have a washer and dryer, or if you don't have a washer and dryer and most of the other homes in the area do have one, then your max rent kind of slides down the scale on GP. So again, you can't kind of argue or kind of the fact that you should deserve more. There's, actually it's not even the HUD counselor. They have some other, I guess maybe it's kind of like the job of the head of the department to figure it out. So you can kind of negotiate in terms of back and forth, but ultimately you stop from negotiating with the tenant, and then you're negotiating with the housing authority about what rent you can put in the lease. Second, your rent is also capped by the individual tenant that you want to approve. Obviously, all tenants will have different income, but they're basically, by the time you're negotiating with the HUD, you're really talking about the case of a particular tenant and their household income. And the counselor is making sure that their total household budget, including rent and utilities, maxes at 30% of their income. For a first-time voucher client, believe they can max up to 40%, but on an ongoing basis, as they're doing a recertification of their rent, it's 30% of their income. So that means if you take the gross rent minus the utility allowance, so that's for water, heating, electricity, that's how they're trying to, that all goes into the formula when they're figuring out how much you could charge for rent. So if you have a less heating efficient unit, let's say, or an area, then you will be penalized in terms of, because obviously they're not paying their heat bill to you. They're paying it to the actual local utility if it's in their name. So then you also have I guess you can also think about what utilities are included versus not. Bottom line is, the HUD is looking at the total household budget, including utilities, and maxing out how much they say the tenant can afford to spend. And at that point, there's nothing else that you can do about it. You're just kind of maxed out. So again, you play a factor in calculating the rent by your location and the amenities that you choose to put in the property. But other than that, there's a lot of formulas that go into deciding, how close you will be to the max rent for the area. The fourth con I'll mention is that there are more rules about terminating the lease when it's a Section 8 tenant. One, you have to keep the HUD counselor in the loop of any actions that you'll take. So if you're going to file a complaint against the tenant, you'll have to send a notice to the HUD counselor and let them know that you're taking this action. And then if you want to terminate the lease, there may be more steps, because even if you're terminating the lease on relatively good circumstances, there's a process and some process that wants you to go through in order for them to free their voucher so that the tenant can take their voucher and apply it to a new landlord. Again, these are all little extra steps that if it was a regular market rate tenant, you could just make the decisions on your own and not really inform anybody else. Before I wrap up, I do want to mention a few more points about leveraging partnership with a local housing authority in your rental business. The first point is that I'm mentioning local housing authority like as one entity for even the Philadelphia metropolitan area. That is not true. There are several housing authorities. Each county pretty much has a housing authority. So there's a Philadelphia housing authority. There's a Montgomery County housing authority. There's a Delaware County housing authority. And actually, even within Delaware County, Chester City is broken out and they have their own housing authority. They have different systems, they have different requirements, and it's important for you to figure out where your property is and what housing authority would be governing you in the tenant process. The biggest thing is, besides different systems, one rule, like for Philadelphia housing authority, you have to enter into a 2-year lease minimum at the first lease. That's not the case in Delaware County. So it's important to kind of understand those nuances. Second, none of these housing authorities do any screening of the tenants. So their main goal is to validate their household size and also the income so that they are, continue to prove that the person, the tenant family, is qualified for the program, and what size voucher, between a 2-bedroom, 4-bedroom. That's all in the housing authority. Everything else that you may need to do so that you feel comfortable, background check, credit check, rental history, all that stuff, that's on you as the landlord. So just because, you're picking a Section 8 tenant is not always the safest choice because you have some other, protection in terms of screening. Again, they make it very clear that you need to do your own screening. And then lastly, you still need to have competitive amenities even if you're renting the Section 8. For sometimes there's some newer landlords, or maybe even some older landlords, who just kind of believe that, because someone needs the help of a voucher, that they, can accept a lesser apartment because that's all they deserve, or I don't know what kind of language you want to use. But the bottom line is, I did mention how amenities can factor into the rent that you're able to collect. So it's important to think about, putting in cost-effective amenities. Now, I'm not saying go out and put granite countertops in all your houses targeting Section 8, but you know what I mean, as far as making sure that, your place stays competitive to the neighborhood. Like I said, it will help you in getting higher rents. Now, if you want more information about how to set your rents for your rental properties, you want to check out the video that's appearing on the screen now. And as always, thanks for watching and happy investing.